Good morning, and thank you very much, Crystal. And hopefully you can hear me and can see my slides. All right. And first, I'd like to thank the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health, College of Public Health, UP Manila, and also COMIL TruckMed Philippines Regional Center for inviting me to the 5th EOH Forum. Today, I'm going to discuss on the topic of protection of workers from occupational hazard in the schools and university. And I would like to basically look at sharing best practices from the post-pandemic workplace. So this is basically a picture in the Rizal Memorial that I was in Philippines during the APEC conference, which was just completed recently, and I thank also the College of Public Health actually invited me to present a workshop and also a forum. So what are workers' rights? Let us start with the workers' right and what workers' right, what is the right of the workers in the workplace. Basically, if there is some very good development in the 110th session of the International Labour Conference in June 2022, where the International Labour Conference adopted the resolution on the inclusion of safety and health working environment in the ILO framework of fundamental principles and rights at work. You must understand that before the June 2022, most of the issues that is under the International Labour Conference is basically focused on labor issues, and very few or none actually focus on occupational safety, health, and environmental issues. So moving forward, the Fundamental Convention includes the Occupational Safety Health Convention and also Promotional Framework for Occupational Health and Health Convention. How is this going to change in the context of occupational health for workers? In the context that it is going to be one of the requirements for countries which under the International Labour Organization to ensure that safety and health becomes an important component in their framework for workers in their individual countries, which is important and for us, especially in this time of post COVID-19 pandemic. So I will start with what is the lesson learned from the pandemic, and then I will share how this lesson actually has applied in our university, and also how we're moving forward and what are the risk factors or the hazards that is changing in the education sector. Since today we're going to focusing on education sector. So protection of worker is important, and when we talk about protection of worker, we must understand that in the workplace we must understand who are the workers or who are the people involved. And these are basically what are their risk factor, what are the dependings on their what they do or their comorbidity, and also beside the workers, we also need to look at other non-worker which is within our organization. We also need to understand what are the equipment or equipment used in the workplace that can form as a hazard, and how this equipment can be misused, and that basically would lead to further hazard. And the other thing is the process that is involved. How can we streamline the process to make sure that the hazard doesn't recover or doesn't recur, and we can protect each individual workers with those to ensure that they are safe. So what have changed in the education landscape during the period from 2019 until 2022? There is an acceleration of digitalization. If you'll notice it, that a lot of us actually have moved online. Currently, this conference is carried out as a webinar. This is something that we wouldn't have thought about in 2019. And having webinar, having speakers coming from vast region of the world and coming in as a digital forum basically is something that we have not thought about. But digitalization doesn't only limit to the use of webinar or online education system, but also digitalization also move into the sector of artificial intelligence. And in the last couple of years or so, artificial intelligence have moved into the landscape of not of all education sectors, all educational involvement. I was basically looking at how can we write a thesis by using artificial intelligence. And there are so many tools available for you to write a thesis. There are tools for you to do paraphrasing. There are tools that actually allows you to get the structure of the thesis. There are tools that actually allow you to do many things, basically. But all these tools are artificial intelligence tools. That means if you put just 2 lines into the tools, and then you can get a whole structure of the thesis ready for you. So all these things are accelerating digitalization. And how are this going to affect our education landscape in the future? And how are this going to affect the workers who is basically who need to learn, or do we need to unlearn or relearn? Because we understand the younger generation are more easily adaptable to digitalization, but some of our educators are from the older generation. When digitalization, the mention of digitalization, the mention of using computers, the mention of teaching online is basically something that is very, very foreign to them. The other thing is the next thing is basically alternative teaching, learning, and assessment method. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of things, as I mentioned, is moved online. We have basically hybrid learning, which is a platform that is developed so that people can learn from home, can come and do a physical class. But also there are also issues of assessment. How can we do assessment as a form, moving from traditional assessment of asking questions and short notes and getting direct answer, and moving to assessment where the question are basically needs the higher order thinking, and moving to the facts of how can we move from closed exam to having an open book exam or take home exam. All these things have actually occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is now currently practiced or encouraged in many universities for us to move from traditional assessment method to a more modern assessment method when we allow students to basically do take-home exam or to do assessment method which is different. And this actually raised the issue of learning again from our traditional educators, where they need to adapt and learn things in a phase that's so quick that it's difficult for them to actually grasp what do you mean, how do you progress from that. The next thing is alternative working environment. We understand that during the COVID-19 pandemic, as mentioned yesterday by Martes, that working from home is basically a norm, and even working from home is something that we need to focus on. But working from home itself is one of the alternative working environment. But we understand that there's a lot of digital nomad currently, which is working for companies in the US or working for companies in Europe, but still being in the Philippines or having holiday in Thailand. So these are the working arrangement that we are talking about, and these are the risk factor, and these are the hazard that educators going to face. Can we in the future teach while we are having a holiday, or while we are abroad, or while we are having a webinar or conference? Can education continue? I think all these things needs more consideration, and people needs to think of it and see how can we, as an educator, decide on what are the hazards that how can we reduce the hazard. By understanding the hazard, by understanding the changes of the education system, now we move on to how can we more focus on risk management and control of how can we control the hazard to reduce the risk. Basically, first thing we need to do is we need to understand the risk. Hazard is something is harm that may occur, but the harm would occur if you are exposed to it. So there are things that you need to understand. What are the risks? And we need to also look at how can we mitigate and manage the risks. And we move back to basic. Although everything is accelerating so fast and development is moving so fast, and also especially in the COVID-19 pandemic, but by focusing, looking back, we understand that if you have the basic foundation of learning, basic foundation of knowledge, you would be able to move to adapt to the new environment. Let us continue by understanding the risk. And this is something that is so important in this COVID-19 pandemic, where there is the issue of what are difference between organization risk or workplace risk factor and personal risk factor. Some people, that's why it's important for us that we when we are working, the risk factor in the company should your risk when you are not working should not be brought into your workplace. Your risk perception, how you perceive risk from non-work environment, should not bring to the work environment. That's why there's quite difficulty. Where the difficulty lies when we basically there is work and non-work become unison, especially when we're talking about working from home. When is work and when is non-work environment? So these issues are key things that we need to focus on. And that's why we're talking about how can we balance between personal and work and organization risk. And also, what do we mean by risk perception? How do you perceive risk when you are going for your personal risk? How can we translate that into workplace risk? So there are basically, when we're talking about hazard, there are two types of main hazard that is there in the workplace. There's safety hazard and health hazard. So safety hazard is something that, of course, most of you know here, because it's very simple, like things that is easier for us to see, easiest for us to understand, like slipping, tripping, fire hazard, moving parts, machinery, tools, equipment, working at height, injection of materials, pressure system, moving vehicle, projection and flying objects, like lifting and other manual handling operation, and maybe even gun violence in school, especially if you talk about schools that in the US where gun violence become a problem, and people need to protect their children from gun violence, for different students from gun violence. And of course, we have health hazard. We have the 5 main health hazard: physical hazard, chemical hazard, biological hazard, ergonomic hazard, and psychosocial hazard. These hazards are present in schools and also in university. The physical hazard, the radiation, the noise, the other environment, and the chemical hazard presence in the chemical laboratory. That is part of teaching, part of learning, and also biological hazard present as in the laboratory also is a problem in schools and things like that. And of course, we have ergonomic hazard and we have psychosocial hazard. But moving forward, as we discussed, how does this hazard change in the post-pandemic era? Is there something different, or is it still the same? We must understand the biological hazard that we have previously. We always think of biological hazard that we introduce into the workplace, that we use, like the rat is in the laboratory, the organism that we use for doing experiment, the frog that we use in the laboratory. Those are hazards that we introduce into the system, into the process of working, of doing it. Ergonomic, the same thing. We're talking about ergonomic in a standard environment, in the classroom where everything is set for you clearly, in your office where everything is set. And psychosocial hazard is there's no change. Change is a problem. When change is too extensive, people would basically, it's difficult for people to adapt to change. But currently, after the pandemic, we understand that biological hazard doesn't only focus on biological hazard that's introduced, but also biological hazard, including human, student, lecturer, co-workers, bringing in biological hazard into the workplace. And ergonomic hazard basically have changed, not from just having a standardized classroom when you can actually focus on how to improve ergonomic, to working from home or alternative working environment, where you don't actually focus or think of ergonomic hazard in your home. And psychosocial hazard is the changes that is happening currently in the education environment. There's so much changes moving from digitalization, looking at alternative learning and teaching, looking at alternative assessment method. All those things are causing psychological hazard, psychosocial stress to our educators. And this is not just happening, this is happening in Universiti Malaya, which basically everybody was discussing it, you know, when we talk about how can we move from traditional assessment to more modern assessment. That was resistance. How can we move from face-to-face lecture to online lecture or to hybrid lecture? There is a lot of resistance that comes into play. That what are the human context is there? Do we have human context? This is a webinar, which is good, but we lost the human contact, like what I would have preferred, like what I did for the EPAC to come. So there are issues that are very, very different from pre-pandemic era. The post-pandemic is something that everything is accelerated and we are moving fast. We are moving so fast. So mitigation and management. Of course, the risk control measure is basically, we know that if there's a source, we can control the source, or can control the path, or we can protect the person. The traditional way of looking at it is looking at it from elimination, substitution, engineering control, administrative control, and the use of personal protective equipment. But in moving forward, when we're looking at physical hazard, chemical hazard, biological hazard, economic hazard, and psychosocial hazard, in the traditional way, yes, these things still work. But for biological hazard, in the modern environment, when you're focusing on how can we control people coming in with biological symptom and come into the class. So the hierarchy of control might change, might be different. Is the hierarchy of control for controlling biological hazard the same or not? Or can we eliminate? Sorry, can we substitute? Can we eliminate? Which is basically something that we have thought about, that for control of biological hazard, both engineering, administrative, and PPE control are important in the context of, in the full context. So let us move back to basic, which is where we started off. We must understand the risk. We must know how to conduct workplace assessment. We must know how to implement control measures. All these things are taught as your foundation in your education system when you're learning. And we must teach our students to be able to adapt and change with the foundation that they have taken and have learned. And that is how we can move forward. So we must focus on the people. We must understand the equipment and the process that is in place. And of course, we must have effective communication. And we understand communication is a problem, especially in the COVID era. Thank you very much.